Welcome back to our language series here on CAEL Live. Today we're going to continue practicing integrating our writing and reading skills together. So we will be producing a short piece of writing based on a long reading article on the CAEL test. So again, by now we've learned to take the first, say 10 seconds even of the test time to have a very quick look at the question so that we fully understand what it is we're being asked to do. So we recognize right away that we are looking at part 5 on the CAEL test, which is the short writing section. We know that we've got 10 minutes to complete this piece of writing, and we understand how we're being evaluated. So we must use the source material, but we cannot copy directly from the text. So all the writing will have to be phrased in our own words. We do have a minimum word count to hit. We want to achieve at least 100 words. And the raters are going to give us a score based on the content of our details, the structure or organization of the response, as well as the accuracy of the language. The raters are looking to see how well we've used information from the reading text in order to guide the writing. Now the question is on the top right-hand side of the screen, and this question reads, based on the reading passage, what are some properties that distinguish asteroids and comets? Now, if you saw the last episode we did, you should recognize this question. This is actually the same question that we wrote about in the previous episode. Last time, though, we organized our answer using what we call a point-by-point method. Today, we're going to answer the same question, but we're going to use a completely different style of organization. We're going to use the block style method. So I'm hoping that you'll have a chance to see last episode we did, as well as today's episode. And you'll be able to compare, I guess, the two styles. And it'll give you some options as far as when you write your answers on the test, as to which style you'd want to use for yourself. So this question, we're told we must use the reading passage on the CAEL test. So what that means is you're going to click on the reading passage tab, which is at the top of the screen here. And that's going to pull up the long reading article that you've already read through and completed. So by the time you get to this short writing section on the CAEL test, you would have answered lots of questions about this long reading article. So it should be very familiar in your mind already. Still though, you'll want to skim read this article to pull out details that will guide your writing. So you can use the scroll bar right in the middle of the page here to navigate all the way to the bottom of the text. The average length for these long reading articles would be about 8 to 9 paragraphs or so. You're going to type your answer right here on the right-hand side of the screen, and the word counter is there as well. So remember, we must achieve at least 100 words. So you're going to keep typing until you see that word counter hit at least 100. So as always, we go to the question. We need to figure out what it is we're being asked to write about. So we're going to start looking for some keywords in the question itself. Now we already know that we're using the reading text, so that's fine. That's why we're on the reading passage tab now. And looking further at this question, we see the words properties, and we know we want to find the properties of asteroids and comets specifically. So if we can scan through that reading text until we find the words asteroids and comets and find the section in the text that actually talks about the properties, that's where we're going to get the details that will inform the writing we're doing today. So very quickly, you'd likely have to look through a couple or at least several different paragraphs until you find the information you need. But very quickly, we see the words asteroids and comets here at the top of this paragraph. And as I continue to scan, right below that, I notice the words distinct properties. So the word properties matches the keyword for my question. So I know that this section of the text then is where I'm going to pull out details so that I can start typing to tell the reader all about the properties of asteroids and comets. Now you'll notice that I'm highlighting on the screen today, and I'm doing that because we're practicing together. On the real CAEL test, there is no feature that will allow you to highlight on the computer screen itself. You can take notes, of course, but you would need to do so with paper and pen. So please keep that in mind. Now, when we start our piece of writing, the topic sentence or the first sentence that we write should answer the question or should at least introduce the main idea that we're going to be writing about. So since we're talking about properties of asteroids and comets, it would be most helpful, I think, to skim read this little paragraph in the text and to identify the properties that the text is talking about. So again, in the real testing situation on a piece of paper with a pen, you might start writing down some of the properties you see. So we notice here that composition will be one property. We see information about the tail of the comet and asteroid, which I guess would be the appearance, you know, what it looks like. We also find information about the orbits. And as we skim read a little bit more carefully, I'm noticing that we've got details here about the shape of the orbit, as well as the distance or the length of the orbital path that these bodies will travel. So those three little properties in the middle of the page right now, these form the outline. Those are the three properties that we're going to introduce as we write out the first sentence of our paragraph. So remember, we're trying to distinguish asteroids and comets. So that means that these three properties are going to be different in asteroids than comets itself. So we start typing away, and maybe this is our first attempt. This is our draft sentence. So it says comets and asteroids are differentiated according to a number of properties. They vary in composition, appearance, and orbital trajectory. So you can see how we've taken those three properties that we identified earlier in the outline, and we wrote them down in a more academic way. So that language, orbital trajectory, that's a really sophisticated way of conveying the message about orbits. So remember, the CAEL is an academic test, so we definitely want to use academic language where we can. So we're going to use this as our topic sentence. And then remember, this is a contrast paragraph, so you do have a choice as far as how you want to structure this. So last week, or last episode, I guess, we did the point-by-point method. So what we did there is we chose the first property, which is composition, and we gave details about a comet's composition and the asteroid's composition. And then we moved on to the second property, which is appearance. We talked about the comet's appearance and the asteroid's appearance. And then we finished it off with the orbital trajectory of both. This week, though, what I'd like to do is look at the block method. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to take the first object, which is the comets, and we're going to talk about all of the properties about comets. So we'll mention the composition, the appearance, and the orbital trajectory. That will be the first part of the paragraph. When we've finished talking about comets, we're going to then talk about asteroids, and we will give details about the asteroids' composition, appearance, and orbital trajectory. Okay, so again, we are focusing today on the block method. So let's get started with that. We've got our topic sentence already written out. Because we mentioned comets first in the topic sentence, we're going to start describing the comets in the paragraph itself. And you'll notice the order of the properties that we've identified here as well. So we mentioned composition first, then we said appearance, and then we mentioned orbital trajectory. So once again, we're going to follow this order as we write the paragraph. This is really going to enhance the coherence of the piece as well. Makes it really nice, nicely structured and nicely organized. All right, so first we need to find the word comets in that paragraph, and there we see it. So remember, we're looking for information about the comet's composition. That's the first property. So there it is there. I've highlighted it in yellow just so we can all see it together here today. So we see that comets are composed of ice, dust, and rock. So when I write that detail down, I want to make sure that I'm using my own words to convey the message. Part of my score is going to come from how well I've paraphrased ideas. So I'm just going to change the verb. Instead of saying comets are composed of, I'm going to say comets contain. It means almost the same thing, and at least I'm using my own vocabulary. Now I will use the same words ice, dust, and rock. Those are the actual materials that the comet is made of, so I can't very well be changing that. If I did, I fear I would actually change the content, the details, and I would make it inaccurate. So we better leave it well enough alone. So that's our first detail. Comets contain ice, dust, and rock. Let's move on to the appearance then of the comet. So we go back to the text. Now remember, this was all about the tail. So as I skim read that section in the text there that's highlighted, I see that I guess the ice melts as it gets closer to the sun. and that's what forms the tail that we see in the sky. So we're going to use our own words to try to convey that message. So we can try something like this. As they pass by the sun, the ice that forms part of their core melts, creating a beautiful tail that is visible in the night sky. Yeah, that sounds great. We've used our own words, I feel, and we've also created a nice complex sentence structure. So we'll leave that for now and move on. Orbital trajectory is the third and final property that we must discuss about the comet. So we go back to the text again. Remember, we find sort of two details. We first see that the orbit is elliptical, and that is basically an oval shape. So if the orbit is elliptical, it allows that object to travel further into space. So that's what we're reading here from the text. So we phrase that in our own words when we're typing, and we might say, comets also have elliptical orbits, so they can travel deep into space before returning closer to the sun. There. So we've summarized what's in the text. You notice our wording is a little bit shorter, which is just fine. We pulled out just the main details there. So we have finished now talking about those three properties as they relate to comets. So we're going to add that into the draft paragraph. So the first half of our paragraph is now complete. So we're going to shift gears now and move on to the second object, talking about asteroids now. We're going to follow the same pattern though. We're going to first talk about the composition of asteroids, then the appearance, and then the orbital trajectory. So let's go back to our text and find that word asteroids. And it's at the top there. So remember, we're first starting to look at the composition. So let's read about that. We see that asteroids are mostly made up of metals and rocky materials. So again, I'm going to change some of the words to make them my own as best as I can. So my attempt at writing this out says, asteroids largely consist of metals and rocky matter. So I've changed enough words there that I've made it my own. Let's move on to the appearance. Remember, this was talking about the tail, I guess. And we have to scan a little bit further down the paragraph, but here we read that it is not common for asteroids to have tails. So I'll just write that down as they rarely possess tails. Last but not least, I need to talk about this orbital trajectory. And I see in the text that asteroids usually have shorter and rounder orbits. So I'm going to expand that a little bit. I want to make a longer sentence, I guess, to be more academic. So I've said asteroids have rounder orbits. As a result, they travel shorter distances throughout the solar system. Okay, so we've completed now our discussion of asteroids. We've talked about all three of those properties. So we're going to add that into the paragraph. And our draft is complete, meaning the first attempt at writing out this paragraph has been finished. Before it's submitted to be rated though, we definitely want to proofread. We want to read it through from beginning to end to double check that the content details are accurate and that the writing and grammar is also correct. I also want to check for transitions. I want to make sure that all of my details connect smoothly together. So we might be adding in some transitional phrases wherever we see fit. So when you're actually typing in the test itself, you can see that this paragraph is on the right-hand side in that little workers area. At this point in the test, I'm guessing you probably have less than a minute to go. And that's fine. If you took 30 seconds just to preview the page and find the paragraph in the text, that will give you the details. And then if you took another, say, 8 to 8.5 minutes to type out this draft paragraph, that's very, very doable. That gives you anywhere from 30 seconds maybe to a minute, if you're lucky, to proofread it. So that's what we're going to do now. And I'm glad we're taking the time because look here, we only have 96 words and we know that we have to achieve at least 100. So if we submitted this paragraph as is, we would actually lose some marks because it's too short. So we have to proofread it anyways and add in a few words to hit at least 100 words. So let's do that together now. I'll just start reading out from the top and then we can make any corrections as we go as needed. So this says, comets and asteroids are differentiated according to a number of properties. They vary in composition, appearance, and orbital trajectory. I like that. Let's not change that topic sentence. I think that works. My first body detail though says, comets contain ice, dust, and rock. And that's accurate. I mean, the idea is correct, but the sentence is short and simple. This is an academic test. So what I'd like to do is just connect that short, simple idea to the next sentence. I'm just going to throw in a conjunction. So at least now I've made a compound, I guess, complex sentence really. So now I have comets contain ice, dust, and rock, and as they pass by the sun, the ice that forms part of their core melts, creating a beautiful tail that is visible in the night sky. Okay, so I like the compound nature of that sentence, but I'm actually finding it a bit clunky now. I think that little middle section there, that relative clause that I've crossed out, I think if I remove that clause, it actually flows a little bit better together. So that revised sentence is within those brackets. So it says, comets contain ice, dust, and rock, and as they pass by the sun, the ice melts, creating a beautiful tail that is visible in the night sky. I honestly like that better, and I know I'm supposed to be adding words, and here I've just taken some out. So what that means is we're going to have to find areas in the bottom part of this paragraph where we can add a few words to make that 100 minimum word count. Let's keep reading. We say comets also have elliptical orbits, so they can travel deep into space before returning closer to the sun. That's fine. That's a compound sentence. Let's leave that alone. Next, though, right here, this is where I shift gears and I start talking about asteroids. So I definitely want some sort of a transition of contrast here. So let me try this one. If I said asteroids, on the other hand, largely consist of metals and rocky matter. That works. They rarely possess tails. I like my vocabulary, but once again, I've got a very short, simple sentence, and I would like very much to connect that back. I can connect it, I guess, to the previous sentence or possibly the following one. What would work best? Let's try this. So now we have asteroids, on the other hand, largely consist of metals and rocky matter, and they rarely possess tails. Okay, fair enough. That's just a compound sentence. I'm going to leave that as it is. This next bit about asteroids having rounder orbits, I feel like I need a transition there as well. And you know, this is my final detail, and I'm supposed to be contrasting asteroids against comets. So I'm just going to start my sentence with that transition. This is a prepositional phrase, but it establishes that contrast. So I'm going to say, in contrast to comets, asteroids have rounder orbits. As a result, they travel shorter distances throughout the solar system. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to make one tiny little adjustment at the end here. I'm not actually adding any words in whatsoever. I'm just changing my punctuation. So instead of using a period, I'm changing that to a semicolon, as you can see here. A semicolon still separates two separate clauses or two separate sentences, but it establishes that those two sentences are more closely connected in meaning, I suppose. And it also allows me to demonstrate a bigger range in my, I guess, my structure and my use of punctuation. So I'll use that just to change things up a bit and hopefully impress the raters. So when I make those adjustments, look at this. We got absolutely lucky. That rarely happens, but with those adjustments we've made, we managed to achieve 100 words exactly. So this is acceptable. That was the bare minimum that we needed to write. So we would not lose marks, at least for the length of this piece any longer. And at this point in time, since we've made these revisions, you probably have very little time left on your clock. You might have 10 seconds remaining if you're lucky, okay? So let's wrap up, I guess, what we did here today. The very first thing we always like to do when we start any type of question, whether it's a test or an assignment, we should preview the page quickly. Figure out exactly what it is you're meant to do and how you're going to be evaluated. Now, as we've been talking over these last several weeks, we know by now that in part 5 of the CAEL test, you're always going to have 10 minutes to write the paragraph. You're always going to be writing at least 100 words, and the evaluation will be the same. The raters always look at your content, your use of the source materials, and your vocabulary. So you shouldn't need to read all of that again with a lot of detail in the test itself. You know this by now, so don't waste your time reviewing that all over again during the test. What you do want to look at very quickly and carefully, however, is the source. So for this question, we were told to use the reading text. So that's why we referenced the article. So once you've had a quick look then at the screen and you know exactly what you're doing, you return to the question and you start pulling out the keywords. So we decided that we would look for the words asteroids and comets within the text itself. And once we found those words, we quickly skim read through that paragraph, I suppose, to make sure we found information about the properties, because that's what we were supposed to write about. So that's what we did here. We then use the information from the source in order to write out the paragraph itself. So remember, you're not making up these details. You're taking the information or the content details from the source itself, but you're writing about them in your own words. You're paraphrasing. So once you've written out the paragraph itself, hopefully you've got at least 30 seconds to a minute somewhere in there left, and you're going to use that time, I hope, to proofread your paragraph. Read it through from start to finish, make sure the grammar is correct, the details are accurate, and if you need to add any transitions just to more smoothly connect the piece, now is the time to do it. Keep an eye on that timer though, because you must finish the piece before the clock counts back to 0. Once that timer does hit 0, your paragraph will be submitted for evaluation, whether you're finished or not. So please do try your best to finish before the clock counts down. All right, so I'm hoping once again that if you've had a chance to view the previous episode we did and this episode today, you'll be able to see the different styles of organization that you can choose from when you're writing a contrast paragraph. Join me next week as we continue to practice our language skills.